All right, today we have another episode from the archives with one of my incredible guests. Enjoy. All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. All right, guys, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson, and very excited to introduce my guest today, Adena Bank Lees. Adena, welcome.
Thank you so much, Guy. It's great to be with you.
Awesome. All right. So Adena is a licensed clinical social worker. She's an internationally recognized speaker, author, trainer, and consultant, providing a fresh and important look at addiction treatment, traumatic stress, and recovery. She's provided more than 1,000 workshops for professionals around the world on topics related to childhood abuse, PTSD, eating and substance use disorders, other addictions, and related mental health issues. Her specialty is childhood sexual abuse, in particular, covert emotional incest. All right, Adena, obviously just a bit about you, but again, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. Where are you calling from?
Tucson, Arizona.
All right. So not too far from California.
Not too far and absolutely beautiful. The sun is shining and it's going to be 70 degrees today. Okay. And then on January 12th, you cannot complain about it.
I can't complain about that. Where are you from originally?
I'm from Long Island, New York.
Oh, okay. I'm from New York as well.
Where?
I'm from Queens originally, and actually used to live on Long Island. I had cousins there, so I know it well. And
I lived in Queens for a year.
All right.
Yeah.
Bada boom.
Right. Exactly.
Well, look, as we had kind of chatted a little bit before we started recording. My goal here really is to give you the opportunity to talk about your passion, your specialty. Let's start out, Adena, with a quote, a sentence, something to set the stage for our listeners. What do you have for us?
Okay, well, I actually have two, and I can't do one without the other. So the first quote for me, and this is not a religious thing, so I want to just set that disclaimer there. There is a God, and I'm not it. And the other quote is, come from love, not fear. Uh-huh. Okay. So those two guide my work and my personal life, actually, so much, because when I first got into the field, I really thought that I could fix people. And I thought I had all the answers for them. And as we'll talk a little bit later, probably, that is because that was the setup of the role that I had in my family system. Mm. And so now that I've been in the field and what I've learned through some of my mistakes that I'll share with you also, I know that there is a bigger force out there, whatever you want to call it, and that I don't have everybody's answers, and that they actually have them inside of them. And my job is to facilitate that through a really healthy therapeutic alliance and whatever skills I have that might fit for them.
So there's a God, and what's the attribution there? Is that something is that you? Who said that?
That is actually a 12-step saying that goes around, and I don't know who the author of that is. I heard that many years ago.
Okay, and the second one, come from love, not fear?
Come from love, not fear. That's based really in the Course in Miracles.
Okay.
And one of my favorite quotes, which is way too long to read here, is by Marianne Williamson, and it's her quote on fear. Mm. And about how our fear is not about how inadequate we are. It's really about how incredibly wonderful we are.
Yeah, I love that. I love that quote as well. So, you started talking about, let's hone in on one of these and kind of dive in. What would you choose?
For the therapist part, I would say there is a God and I'm not it, because I think for that role, that is just so primary for me to have the appropriate boundaries that I need to stay as objective as possible, to be able to allow the client to do the work they need to do rather than me interfering and I think disrespecting their process by making decisions for them, by thinking I know what they need, by telling them I know what they need. It just doesn't work. And for any new people, I just want to say, it's been over 25 years I'm doing this, and it continues to be a challenge for me. It's a lot better and easier than it used to be because I have the habit of it now. And I also want to share with you that before every session and during session, I am breathing slowly and deeply. And I am saying to myself, please allow me to be a channel here and to be really in tune with my client and to not get into my own ego. Because as soon as I do that, I lose the connection with my client. And that therapeutic alliance is cut, and they don't have me present with them the way I believe they need to have me present in order to do the work that they need to do their healing. Yeah. I don't know if that makes sense, Guy.
It does, and you're talking about so many really inspiring and rich things here. This idea of fixing. I mean, man, come on. We've all been there. I've certainly been there, and continue to be pulled in that direction. But what you said, Adena, about before and during sessions, having that self-awareness, that is so huge. And I want to get into that. Okay. As we kind of talk about, as we get into this interview here, because that is gold, I think, for our listeners, having the wherewithal, the self-awareness. And I'm really curious about how you got to that point. But let's move on here because I'm sure we'll get into it. How did you get into this field? Tell us that story.
I grew up in a family, and I joke a lot that I grew up with Sigmund Freud as my father. My father was a psychologist, and he was trained back in the 50s. And so he was very Freudian trained. And we heard a lot about that in my home. And I knew when I was 14, at ninth grade, I made the decision that I was going to be a psychotherapist. And I thought I'd be a psychologist because that was the role model that I had. I had no idea that there were social workers and clinical social workers at that time. And I made the decision that I knew I needed to help people, that was a really main purpose for me on the planet. And that by helping other people, I was going to help to heal the planet. What I didn't realize, Guy, was that getting into this field was going to help to heal me. And that's another message that I have for new people, and just a reminder for people who've been around.
So you grow up with a father who kind of reminded you of Sigmund Freud. How did this idea that you wanted to help people, where did that come from?
It was natural in me. I think it came with my DNA at my birth. Maybe it was before my birth. I was always doing that. I was always listening. I was always incredibly sensitive to other people's feelings. And it was just part of who I was. And I believe it is a part of who I am. So it wasn't like somebody had to talk me into it, or it's just who I am. And it's just who I am. I mean, I've said that 3 times, but I don't know. I don't really know what else to say.
No, perfect.
Like a spiritual purpose, and I came with the software.
Right. Beautiful. Yeah. So, but okay, and how did that channel into addiction and trauma? Where did that get carved?
So that's a great question. So, the decision in ninth grade, I actually was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa in ninth grade and went to my first therapist. And I want to say my dad and mom were instrumental in continuing to develop this. And I'll get to your question. I'm giving you the story. My dad said, I want you to go to somebody who you can relate to. So I'm going to give you a list and talk to me about a male or a female, age, etc. And I picked a woman who was 29. And I went to see her, and she had her private practice, a separate office by her home. And I related to her so much, and I really attached to her. And I said, that's who I want to be. I want to be Andrea. That's my role model. And when I went to college and studied psychology, and then I worked for a couple of years as a case manager when the deinstitutionalization was happening on Long Island. There were 2 or 3 major psychiatric hospitals that people had lived in for years. And they were sending people out into the community now in group homes, et cetera. And so I got the job and did that for 3 years as I went to graduate school at Adelphi University on Long Island for social work. And I really thought I was going to be a marriage and family therapist. I wanted to work with families, especially with kids and adolescents, because I had such a turbulent adolescence. I really thought I identify with them, and I'm close enough in their age, in my late 20s, and I want to be Andrea. So I found out about, when I graduated, or a little bit before I graduated, I found out about an internship at a place called the Caron Foundation, Caron, and it's in Pennsylvania. And they have, it's a drug and alcohol treatment center that has a 5-day inpatient residential program for adult children of alcoholics and people who've been traumatized as children. And they use experiential methods. And I have to tell you that I was extremely bored by the way that I was taught to do therapy in graduate school in my internship. And I said, if this is therapy, I don't want to do it. I'm going to do something else. And then I went to Caron, and I fell in love. And I said, this is the way that I am meant to do therapy, which was psychodrama. And I'm a certified psychodramatist and been doing it since 1989. And knew again that was one of the modalities, and the major one that was going to really fit for me, that I'd have passion about and I would really be able to help people with. And the drug and alcohol and trauma came in because I was working with people who were either already in recovery, or we did intervention on them at Caron at the 5-day program. And I said, okay, so I think my focus is shifting here because it feels right to work with this population. And then I found out about this treatment center in Tucson, Arizona, that was a premier treatment center for addiction and trauma at that time in 1990, 89, 90. And I was lucky enough to get flown out for an interview and get hired.
Wow.
And I learned most of what I know, to really set me up to be the kind of therapist that I am today. I learned at 2 years or so at that treatment center.
What's the name of that?
Sierra Tucson.
Okay.
And I grew up there. What I say is I grew up there. And just one very quick story. In graduate school, in the diagnosis and assessment class, we were looking at the DSM-3 at that time. And the instructor said, you will never see this diagnosis because it's so rare, but we have to talk a little bit about it. It's called multiple personality disorder. And it was fascinating to me. I mean, I was always fascinated about how the brain worked. When I was in undergraduate school, physiological psychology was my most favorite class. And if I could go back to school now, I would go back for that, neuropsychology. That's an aside. I'll bring you back here. So he said, you'll never see somebody with this diagnosis. So one of my first groups at Sierra Tucson, I'm 28 years old, and I'm running this group, and somebody switches in front of me and gets very angry and almost violent and blocks the door, and I can't get to the door. And I think to myself, okay, he told me that I would probably never see a client with this diagnosis. And here I am. What the heck am I supposed to do? And so, it was, okay, Dina, go on your instinct with whatever you have now from whatever experience you have. And the client was able to be calmed and sat, and, we were able to do what we did. And I don't remember the specifics. I just knew that I had a pull from, not my head of what model am I going to use, but I had a pull from my gut about, what feels like the right thing to do right now. And that's the other thing for new people is don't leave out your gut. For me, that has been so critical. And I have to tell you, Guy, that is the main piece that I zone in on with my trauma clients, is helping them to get back in touch with their gut, get back in their body enough to trust that gut. And every time they do and make a decision, I really reinforce that and keep coming back to that, about how your gut hasn't lied to you. Your head lies and talks you out of things, but your gut doesn't lie to you. And they can go on their own. It's like, my job is so that you don't need me anymore.
I just love, Adena, the way each of your stories and what you're saying kind of in its entirety really kind of goes back to that, your gut. When you talked about your early training, when you're like, this is not for me, I'm bored. And then when you had that other experience, you were like, bam, this just feels right. This is where I belong. That listening, right? I mean, not everyone is going to, I think, be so lucky as to kind of find that maybe as quickly. But what I'm hearing you say here is you're listening to that. You're honoring that. And I think for all of us, but especially for newer clinicians, that is such, it's just gold. I love it.
Yeah, thank you. And I have to say, this is one of my pieces, is that the reason I think that I did that, first of all, I think it is part of who I am. And the other is my own therapy and recovery has allowed me to live in my body and trust that gut. And I have enough experience now that I have the faith that works, rather than in the beginning, I said, okay, I'll believe what you're telling me, and I believe that you believe it. But I had to have the experience myself, both professionally and personally, to now have faith that works. I really want to pass on that learning to my clients.
That's a great point. That's a great point. How about an early mistake, an early clinical error, and what you learned from that?
Okay, so Sierra Tucson, working with a family and parents and adult clients. Sierra Tucson is an adult treatment center, 18 and over. And this person was probably male, probably late 30s, early 40s. And family work in the trauma program, not in the addiction program. And I got caught in a power struggle with him. What I knew was my heart rate started to go up, and I started to be reactive because he was extremely provocative, and he was angry and challenging me. And I usually know how to sidestep power struggles, but I got caught. And I said to him, well, of course this is happening with you parents, because look what you're doing. And I didn't say it in a way where, okay, so look at your part in this. It was, well, look at what you're doing. Like, you idiot,
right.
That was the meta message, if you want to say that. And I knew as soon as it came out of my mouth, I went, oh my goodness, I just really messed this up here. And I lost any credibility with him, unfortunately. And he made a complaint to my supervisor, and so, I got clinical supervision around it, which I have. That's another push that I say, you're not in clinical supervision, you're not practicing ethically, especially with this population. There is way too much of a risk of countertransference and getting very messy. So that was, I knew it when it was coming out of my mouth, and I was not effective after that. My co-facilitator was the person who was able to be effective.
How can you talk a little bit about how that power struggle unfolded on your part?
How do I say? I'm trying to be politically correct here, so give me just a second. So what I know about me is that when someone is playing the victim role and identifies in that role, I can get hooked into either going into rescuing them, or I get really angry and I want to do what Cher did to Nicolas Cage in the movie Moonstruck, and, slap across the face and say, snap out of it. Right. And I would never want to hurt anybody. And I don't, but I just want to own, because I think it's important, and it's been important for me in my supervision and consultation, to own my shadow side, to own things I don't want to own, that I'd feel ashamed about. Like I would have a thought like that. Like I just want to say, come on, Right. And if I don't own that, I'm going to act out on it. So supervision, again, I'd plug for that. But how it unfolded was that's what happened. He was playing the victim really well. And I saw him trying to manipulate his parents and me and the other therapist, and I wasn't having it. And rather than being able to do what I said before, is breathe deeply and slowly and, continue to say, ask for guidance, like, okay, to get my ego out of here. It showed up very, very fast, Guy. I mean, it happened before I even realized it. And so I just take it, I was human and that happened, and what can I learn from it? I hope that answers your question enough. It does. And it kind of reiterates the theme that's been unfolding in this interview from my perspective, is that the work, quote unquote, you've done, the self-awareness that you've cultivated to get to the place where you're able to, before session and in session, have that awareness such that you're working on your breathing and so forth. How did you get to that point? I get to that point. Well, I'm thinking one thing when you're talking, and that is some of my education in the early 90s and throughout about interpersonal neurobiology, Dan J. Siegel's work and other people's work, that our nervous system impacts the other person's nervous system. Mm-hmm. And that the mind really is, when we're connecting with somebody else, it's not just in our own body. And so when I found that out, I realized, I have to keep myself calm. And when I keep myself calm, this is a learning from psychodrama, that when I keep myself calm, my spontaneity goes up. And my spontaneity, in psychodrama definition, spontaneity is the ability to have an adequate response to a new situation and a different response to an old situation. So that informs me, as well as my spontaneity being my intuition, being when I'm sitting with a client and I'm thinking something and then it comes out of their mouth about 20 seconds later, the being in tune with that client. So breathing in session, I do meditative practice. That's been very helpful for me, knowing that my nervous system impacts their nervous system. And if I want them to help them self-regulate, I need to be regulated. And when I breathe and slow it down, that I have more of that spontaneity, and I'm not coming from my head and my intellect. I'm coming from my heart and my gut. And that is what I've seen is the transformation piece for my clients. And they've told me that. I've gotten that feedback. You are the person who's been most present for me in my entire life. And I've never had a therapist even to be as present as you are with me. And it means so much. Do what is your why? What keeps you going in this work? What keeps me going in this work is seeing the miracles that happen for my clients, the ahas, the changes in behavior, the going from being a victim in childhood of trauma to letting go of that role in adulthood and being, and what I say is going from victim to survivor to thriver, and to see my clients move into thriving. Oh my goodness. My heart just opens, it bursts with love. It's just, and I don't take credit for it. What I know is I'm a part of the process for them. And I've been a facilitator and a guide, and that is my greatest honor. So that's what keeps me going. It reminded me of something in your bio that I'd like to ask you to kind of clarify, sure. Which was the term covert emotional incest. I mean, I think people can maybe figure that out, but what does that mean? Thank you for asking. I appreciate that, because this is also, I know one of my purposes is to get the information about covert emotional incest out there to not only professionals, but to the lay public as well. So, quick definition. It's when one or both parents objectify and or use their child as a surrogate or substitute spouse. And I want to say a couple more things about that. So when a child is used as a substitute spouse or objectified, it inappropriately sexualizes that child. And they have to grow up real fast. Aspects of their childhood are denied. And the child is forced to meet the parents' emotional and romantic needs. Now, this, as Ken Adams, who wrote the book Silently Seduced, he's kind of the father of, he calls it covert incest. He talks about the surrogate spouse role. I add in the objectify role in terms of covert emotional incest. He talks about the yucky or icky factor, and that's absolutely true. So there's not a big 3-syllable word, clinical term for how people who've experienced this feel. It is just icky, and you can't put your finger on it, and you don't have a name for it until you do. And so you feel special, like an incest survivor feels special. I'm the chosen one and adult-like, and yet you also know the back of that, which is the powerlessness and the guilt and the shame. So it's confusing. It really messes up people's ability to have healthy, intimate relationships. And it's something that the professional community really still doesn't talk about, doesn't have research about. I think the last two things I'll say is, covert emotional incest victims have very similar signs and symptoms to overt or physical sexual abuse victims or survivors. And so we can just jump on that train that they've been physically sexually abused. Really, really caution about that and learn about covert emotional incest so that you can ask the right questions. And you can discern between that. We know in the 90s there was a whole movement, the false memory movement, and we don't want to be jumping on any bandwagons. So we want to be able to interview and assess. And I was going to say one other thing, and it's gone. That's what happens when you're in your mid-50s. So if it's important, we'll come back to it.
Thank you for clarifying, and I'll link up to that book, Silently Seduced, in the show notes at traumatherapistproject.com. Adena, you've given a lot of advice, a lot of suggestions. Let's kind of hone in on advice nuggets you have for people getting into this field, even people who are practicing in this field. What would you say to them?
If you don't mind, I want to say one other thing about covert emotional incest. Please. And then go into that if we have the time.
Sure.
That is that on my website, there's a lot of information about covert emotional incest. Ken Adams' book is there. Pat Love, The Emotional Incest Syndrome, her book is on there. My book that I'm writing will be published in the summer. The working title for that book is called Maybe I'm Not Crazy After All. And it is a book of my story of covert emotional incest. And it's written in a form of stories and pieces so that it's not the typical self-help book. My colleagues have asked me for a book that is about somebody's story that clients can read and really identify with, rather than a typical self-help book about explaining things in clinical terms, because the clients don't want to read that, but they would read somebody's quote-unquote biography. And so the book that I'm writing is my story, along with information that will provide information for therapists as well as clients. So I just wanted your listeners to know that and to be kind of looking out for that.
Excellent. Okay. Well, when's that coming out?
Come out either June or July.
Okay.
That's what we're hoping for.
I'll have you back on here and we can talk about that.
That'd be awesome. Thank you. All right. So the you said recommendations,
sure.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. So first recommendation is to do your own therapy and continue to stay aware of who you are and what might get in the way for yourself. Again, psychodrama, a big piece is role reversal, being able to see the world through somebody else's eyes and feel the world through their body. And if I've never been in the client role, how am I supposed to really be able to empathize and switch places with my client? So I'm really big on that. I'm extremely big on being in ongoing clinical supervision with somebody who knows what they're talking about regarding whatever specialty you're in. We're talking about trauma now. So somebody who really knows about trauma and is up on the latest and greatest in terms of research and clinical models. That you will not learn everything you need to know in your graduate program, that you will learn everything you need to know afterwards from your clients, and continued education. Really, really important. And don't make anybody a major guru and just think that, okay, they know it all. Mm-hmm. Use your critical mind. Feel what it is that feels right. Like I had said earlier, what feels right to you, what doesn't. And an example of that is I got trained in EMDR. I love EMDR. I think EMDR is fabulous. It doesn't fit with my personality, so I don't do it much. I refer out.
Nice.
So those are the major recommendations. Oh, one last thing. Seriously ask yourself the question of why you got into the field in the first place, because that was a major catalyst for me to the quote of "there is a God and I'm not it."
Awesome. Okay, this is great. Mm-hmm. I love it. All right, let's kind of move here to go-to books. I mean, you mentioned Silently Seduced. What else would you offer? Okay,
so there are 3 books that have transformed me. The Silently Seduced book, yes, and Pat Love's Emotional Incest Syndrome. For Trauma and the Therapist by Lorianne Perlman and Karen Sackvitney. Again, back in the 90s, haven't seen a book like it since. It's about therapists who are treating sexual abuse, in particular trauma, and the kinds of countertransference that happen, so that you don't feel like you're crazy, but you have a guide. And they push so much about self-care. And that's the other thing about have a life outside of your work. I heard Colin Ross say that on one of your podcasts, and he's one of my mentors. So that book saved my life, informed my practice. Another book that blew my mind and opened me to a very, very different way of looking at people was The Mosaic Mind by Richard Schwartz, who is the developer of internal family systems therapy. That was his first book. So anything by Richard Schwartz at this point I would recommend. What he taught me was that people aren't sick, that dissociation and people's trauma reactions are about brilliant survival skills. And so to pathologize people doesn't work. Colin Ross taught me that also. And the latest book that new people will probably hear about is The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And that book, van der Kolk's just talking to you. I've seen him present so many times. He's another mentor of mine. He's just talking to you in that book about his experience and about his research. And he talks, and he has chapters on yoga, internal family systems, and EMDR, and theater, because he uses those programs at the Trauma Center in Boston. And so he's challenging kind of the status quo medical model. He's always been doing that. One of the things I love about him. So that book, incredible, very easy read and very informative.
Awesome. Okay. So we have Trauma and the Therapist, The Mosaic Mind, The Body Keeps a Score. I'll have all these linked up. And how about if people want to get in contact with you, Adena? What's the best way?
Best way is, I think, through my website at this point. I have my website at adenabanklees.com. I also have a professional Facebook page, Adena Bank Lees, and I post a lot of things on there. My hope is that I can put a link on my Facebook page to this conversation that we're having.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Yeah. And I don't like to give out my phone number on things like this. So I will have people with my website and my Facebook page, and you can get my phone number on my website.
Awesome. Well, it's been just a joy talking to you. I mean, your passion just comes through, and I love it. Again, when your book comes out, I'd love to have you back on here, because I feel like I could be talking to you forever about these topics. Sincerely, I mean, I know that our listeners can hear the passion in the work you do, and the stories you've told about how things unfolded for you is just. This really, Adena, is what this podcast is about, is looking at that and being inspired by that. And I want to thank you so much for sharing that on this podcast.
You're so welcome. And when we talk next time, there's another influential person and model around psychodrama and trauma that I want to talk about, because I left her out, and her work has transformed me as well. So we'll talk again.
Oh, great. I look forward to it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Guy.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.